First of all, I have to say congratulations for you, but for all of us, frankly, Alex. Well done. How did you do it? And looking back on it, what was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome?
Well, David, thank you very much for having me. And look, it's a very proud and humbling day here at Johnson & Johnson, but hopefully not only for the United States, but for the world. And look, David, I remember that day about 13 months ago. And whoever could have imagined then that the pandemic would reach the heights that it did, that all the economic challenges that you just mentioned that we would have been experienced. But, from day one, our scientists, our physicians, our engineers were as committed as ever to really making a difference for the world. And it started with great science, where we took a vaccine platform that we had used before in areas like Ebola and HIV. We applied new data from the spike protein. We very quickly put it into clinical trials. We gathered a lot of information. And really, it's all culminated in the news Friday from the FDA Advisory Committee, and then on Sunday from the CDC Advisory Committee, that we've got a safe, we've got an effective single-shot vaccine that can be refrigerated using very standard procedures. And that's going to be available right here in the United States to the tune of 100 million doses by June of this year.
So
I couldn't be more proud.
Sorry, take us through what we know about your vaccine at this point, because there's a lot of talk about efficacy in comparison to Pfizer and to Moderna. On the other hand, you were a little bit behind the others. Does that mean you've had more exposure to some of the variants that people are so concerned about?
The short answer is yes, David, it does. And look, from the very beginning, we tried to look at how could we design the very best possible vaccine in terms of safety, efficacy, dosing, and frankly, administration and logistics. And we had a platform that had been used in more than 100,000 patients that gave us a lot of confidence that the safety profile was very strong. We tested it thoroughly. And what's really important about our test, David, our clinical trials, was we didn't start until September. And so just as we had come out of what I would say the low point over the summer, and we started seeing cases increase certainly across the United States, but more importantly around the world, that's when our trial began. So we were really into, the heat of the virus spread. Number two, 40% of our patients were in the United States, but we had about 40% in Latin America, and we had about 15% that were actually in South Africa. So where, one of the most difficult strains is the South African strain. And by the way, 90% of the 15,000 patients that we were working on there, or those that were infected, actually had the South African variant. And so it gave us a lot of data, and what we saw were still very strong effectiveness rates. In fact, 85% in serious cases, and 100% of the time this far has kept patients out of the hospital and kept them from dying. So we know that this is going to be a really important tool for healthcare providers around the world.
So go forward and give us a sense of where you're headed. Do you envision a world in which we have different versions of the vaccine for different variants, or do you think we know enough now to think we'll be able to have one version that will be good enough for all the variants?
Well, David, look, I think all of these vaccines work extremely well. And the fact that we've seen these kind of results from 3 different platforms now is very encouraging. And my recommendation is everybody needs to get a shot as soon as they possibly can, because every time this virus spreads, it's transmitted, and it has the potential to mutate, to cause another variant. And so the faster we can get people vaccinated to stop that from happening, the likely better outcome we're going to have. But the good news is also because of these new platforms that we have that are so much more adaptable, that right now companies, and ours included, is working on next generation should that be necessary. So we're going to have to see how this plays out over the next 9 months. We could be in a situation where we see a precipitous decline in the virus. We could see some surges in the fall that we'll need to stay protective of. Or we could see where we could need a booster shot or another shot further down the road, similar to what you would do with the flu shot. But that being said, we're in a much better place today based upon all the great science, research, and engineering that we've been doing.
So give us a sense about getting into people's arms, because now you have the vaccine. We're all eager to get it and to protect us. You've got, as I understand, about 4 million doses ready to go. They came out of your Dutch facility. Are there manufacturing issues in Baltimore? Are you concerned at all about that?
No, look, we're on track with our plans. We do have approximately 4 million, 3.9 that are literally on trucks right now being rolled out in the United States. We expect to do 20 million in March. And look, over the next several weeks, we've got to go through regulatory approvals and a few other processes, but then we expect to hit a very strong cadence, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can be doing, we will have done 100 million doses by the end of June, and near 1 billion by the end of 2021, en route to a path of almost 2 billion by 2022. It's been a remarkable achievement here too. And while the discovery and the development of the vaccine, I think, has been really impressive, at the same time, we've had to scale up these manufacturing facilities. In this case, David, the site you were mentioning, it was a parking lot 8 or 9 months ago. Today, it's one of the most advanced biopharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in the world.
So is there anything more we can do to actually ramp up the production further than what you've already done? And that would either be Johnson & Johnson perhaps opening new facilities like Baltimore, or even partnering with others.
It's all about partnerships. And look, we're partnering and we're working hand in hand with the U.S. government. And I've got to say, they've been great collaborators, great partners, helping us unlock even additional sources where we could accelerate or increase some of our capacity. We're working with other pharmaceutical companies, internal and external suppliers. We've got a network of more than 10 different partners on a global basis that we put together to ensure not only that we can be very efficient and effective, but we also have got a robust network that is going to support this effort, not only for the next 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 weeks, but for the next several years, and we can get the kind of outcomes we want to achieve.
Give us a little bit of a sense about that distribution system and how it gets set up, how the priorities are set. You said you're working closely with governments. How much of it is with the White House, Jeff Zients and his team? How much of it is they're deciding where these 4 million and then ultimately 100 million go? How much of it is individual governors or states?
Sure. Well, look, it's been impressive to see the work of Jeff Zients and his team. And again, the outreach, the collaboration, the partnership in getting a lot of these programs into place during this particular period. We've got sites here in the United States, both that produce drug substance, as well as the finishing process where you actually fill the bottles. It's called fill and finish. And again, we have an extensive network here that's being expanded based upon the partnership that we're doing with the government. We've also got sites in Europe where we do the same thing, and outside of Europe as well. So that network has been put together, has been established, has undergone the technology transfer that's essential to getting this kind of complex manufacturing process in place. It's going through some of the final approval as we speak, but we've already demonstrated the ability to produce a significant and a very high throughput so that we can get the kind of volumes that we're talking about.
But Alex, when you have the 4 million or the 20 million or 100 million, who do you call to say, where should I ship them?
Well, right now it's directly to the government. So in the United States, the government determines, as you may have seen on some of the footage today, it goes from basically our distribution facility in UPS trucks to McKesson, and then the government works very closely to distribute it to the states. They're working closely with the governors as well as with some of the large retail chains. And the good news is, David, I think now that we have a third vaccine out there, and by the way, kudos to Pfizer and Moderna for also significantly increasing their output. I would predict that in the second quarter, we're no longer going to be near as supply constrained. And as we get more doses out, we're going to be able to open up some of the requirements and restrictions regarding who can get the vaccine and who can't. And as a result, our throughput will go up. And I think we're going to see a big difference about the number of patients being vaccinated in the second quarter around our country, let alone the world.
Well, let's talk about the world for a minute, because as a practical matter, we're going to need the whole world vaccinated, I think, if we're really going to be safe from this thing. How concerned should we be about certain barriers? I mean, for example, are there any limitations on your ability to import from Europe to the United States, or vice versa, ultimately to export from the United States to Europe and elsewhere around the world?
Well, David, it's a good point because, look, none of us are safe until all of us are safe. And we need to get vaccines out clearly and do shots in the arms here in America, but around the world, if we're ever going to achieve the kind of normalcy and, the kind of free travel that we enjoyed for decades before. And so we're collaborating and coordinating right now with European authorities, I mentioned earlier, with our sites in Europe. It's essential that we maximize our global supply chains, which we're doing, in fact, with the government and with other companies to achieve the kind of output that we're talking about. And we're working with organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well, for the developing parts of the world to make sure we can get them several 100 million doses as well. So it's comprehensive. And we're seeing the early waves of that in the United States. You're going to see that rapidly rolled out in Europe in our case, and simultaneously. And as we go through the course of the year, you're going to see that happening in many, many other parts of the world as well.
Finally, Alex, I know you well enough to know you think strategically, and it's become a commonplace for all of us to say the world's never going to be the same as it was pre-pandemic. But what about for Johnson & Johnson, for your industry? Can you see ways in which you're going to make different decisions about deployment of capital, employment going forward? Does it change the nature of Johnson & Johnson's business, what we've been through here with this pandemic?
Well, look, I'd say there's a few things that are very important strategic considerations for us going forward. And the first is the importance of global public health. I mean, one thing that this pandemic has demonstrated that if we don't have strong, resilient public health systems in place, we don't have national security, economic security, or frankly, security as a society. And so making that investment, focusing more on durability, sustainability, and maybe even some redundancy versus just maniacally on effectiveness and efficiency is going to be critical for us, whether it's storing PPE, creating vaccine capacity, or the way that we even think about handling surges in hospital is a very important lesson, I believe, for our industry. The second one for me, David, is just technology. And whether it's the technology of the science, the way we were able to collect data, quickly take the genomic information, apply it to a platform, have 3 vaccines in a period of months versus what ordinarily would require years. The way we've been able to share data and information to understand where this virus is and it isn't. I think it represents just a significant increase in the way we use data and the way that we apply that in decision-making in healthcare systems throughout the world. And last but not least, certainly the importance of health. There's not a CEO, there's not a government leader or a stakeholder now that's not thinking about what's my role in healthcare. How can I make sure that we're taking care of our populations, of our people, of our workforce? Because if we don't have health, it can put everything else at risk. So clearly a lot of risk, but I see a lot of opportunity coming out of this going forward, David.
Okay, finally, Alex, this is Bloomberg. You wouldn't think well of me if I didn't ask the question. Is Johnson & Johnson going to make money off of this vaccine? I know that's not why you did it. You did it because we needed you to do it. But are you going to make money?
Well, we're doing this on a not-for-profit basis. And, early on when we saw this, we knew that it was critical to not have cost, to not have the price of the vaccine get in the way of access and administration. And so we are committed to taking that approach during this pandemic phase. Longer term, look, we think that there will be a very significant opportunity with vaccines, not only in how it gets applied in other areas in infectious disease, but gosh, can it be applied in areas like cancer and Alzheimer's disease and other areas that could really offer some great new hope for patients and at the same time create a great business opportunity for Johnson & Johnson.